This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today. Johannes, welcome to the show. Honored to have you on. Something that you think through, and we briefly discussed like the sustainability piece of in multifamily and different asset classes. Speak to that a little bit. Like, what is the importance of sustainability? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually has played an important role in going active. So one thing I should mention, first of all, is that my very kind of initial active effort was an accident. So I had made an investment, a venture capital investment in a company that 3D prints housing. So they use 3D printers to produce rental units, duplexes specifically. Made a small investment as a venture capitalist, a very early stage company, and went to Houston to meet the CEO. And the CEO asked me to consult for them, to help them with developing the business, because I had this sustainability background and it's a big part of their selling point. So what sustainability really means is this idea that we are facing all these environmental problems right now, most notably our changing climate. So we have these extreme weather events, we have sea level rise, we have droughts, we have extreme heat. And that's something that is starting to have an impact on real estate. So if you look at, for example, the property insurance rates in coastal Texas or Florida today, it is very expensive compared to what it used to be. And that's because of these natural disasters. And so we need to find ways to make our buildings more resilient, more robust to these changes. On the other side, we also have opportunities to reduce our expenses. So increasingly, solar power, for example, is cheaper than it used to be. It's very eco-friendly, but it's also quite affordable these days. So many people are using that to reduce their electricity bill, which again can be a big deal if you are, let's say, in the South and you have very high air conditioning bills. You can really reduce your expenses with this. And that's something that I do as part of my day job. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins University, teaching kind of energy issues there. So I've tried to broaden some of that expertise into my real estate investing as well.
Interesting. 3D printing. I know we're going to get into that a little bit because it's not something I'm very familiar with. However, I do have a friend that has a small one at home, and it's pretty cool, some of the stuff he can make with this thing. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how this is going to affect, multifamily or just real estate, right, in general, and as we dive into that. So, as we're just kind of skimming the surface of sustainability right now, how do residents think about sustainability? How is this going to affect them? And then, maybe we'll dive into this a little further, but what do the residents think or any studies or anything on that yet?
Yeah, so it really depends on where you are in the country. So there are some parts of the country where this is becoming fairly mainstream and people are concerned about their energy impact and all that. But those are often not the places where most multifamily investors are. So look at the states where sustainability is a big deal, California. But California is a difficult place to invest because of the extremely high costs and all the kind of tenant-friendly laws and all that. It's much less of, I would say, something that's on tenants' minds in Texas or Florida today. But I think this is also changing. You see a big difference between younger people and older people, for example. So millennials and Gen Z and all that are more aware of these issues than, let's say, the baby boomers.
Speak to, what a sustainable multifamily development looks like. I guess talk through that a little bit. And I think that'll help us as we move forward.
Absolutely. The first thing I would say about that is that multifamily is itself inherently sustainable, right? Because you are kind of packing a lot of density in those buildings. So if you compare how much land, how many resources, how much commuting do you need if you have 1,000 people living in multifamily units as opposed to single family homes in a suburban kind of subdivision? It's a big difference, right? So that is the first thing. But today, I would also say, if you look at the sustainability and also that resilience side of multifamily, it would be things like energy efficiency. So just designing these things in a way that keeps, the interior space cool during the summer and warm during the winter. Installing things like solar panels, solar water heating can be very good ways. You will also want to look into appliances, how energy efficient those are. That can save you a lot of money down the road. So it's a combination of just multifamily being inherently sustainable because of the density, but also then using the appropriate technologies that you use for multifamily.
Interesting. Any other ways that maybe we, during a development, I know we're going to get into some 3D printing stuff, but maybe you could give us a little tidbit here. What is 3D printing? What's the role that it's going to play in this as well?
Yeah, so 3D printing is really, from a sustainability perspective, reduces environmental impact of actually building those homes. So think of traditional construction. It takes many months, and it means a lot of crews coming in and out, lots of material coming in and out. It takes months and months, and all that results in transportation emissions. It results in all kinds of other process emissions. The materials often have to come from very far. But if you look at 3D printing, you bring in this big tent on the site. You bring in the 3D printer, which is a huge machine, not like your friend's little 3D printer. It's a huge 3D printer, costs $1 million just the printer itself. And then within a week, you have the structure of the house ready. You have 3 people, you have the printer, and then in a week, you have the house ready. The materials are often completely local. So our first development with family communities is in the Houston area, and everything we need to build the homes themselves is within 1 hour's drive of our site.
Wow. In 1 week, the home is complete. What's it made out of? I don't know what this looks like. I'm trying to visualize this in my mind.
Absolutely. So let me walk you through the whole kind of sequence of events. So first, of course, you need to do site work, and 3D printing doesn't help with that, right? You have to have all the infrastructure and everything ready. That's done old school, just very traditional techniques. The key thing where we save months of time and tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars is the structure, right? So you're kind of like layering concrete. These are concrete or cement homes, at least with our technology, and you're just layering them one layer at a time. But what is really cool about that is that you are layering it in a way that makes everything else very easy. So for example, you have all the spaces ready for electric, for plumbing, and everything there. So once you have the structure, all you need to do is go and add electricity, plumbing, all that, add the appliances, the finishes, and that's it. Today, I would say they still look a bit different from traditional construction, but not so much anymore. You have these homes actually, for example, in Austin, there is a 3D printed community that sold at market price, and people have been very happy with it.
So it's actually pouring concrete. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Because my friend's 3D printer, it just looks like plastic. So I was just trying to figure that out. So, maybe why don't we jump into what is 3D printing, and let's talk about that a little bit, because we're talking about it. I know the listeners are thinking through this, and maybe they have a friend that, done the same thing, or, making things with it, and they're trying to figure this out. What is 3D printing? And let's dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way you can think of 3D printing is it's really just a technology that takes the basic idea of printing. You have this machine that spits out paper in kind of traditional, I wouldn't call it 2D printing, but just traditional printer. But then instead of just having that for paper or graphics or something like that, you can have that for almost anything. You can print things. If you design the printer the right way, you can print almost anything now. You can print different machines, you can print out different materials, you can print out homes now. And what it does is, because it kind of streamlines the process, you can do things a lot faster and a lot lower cost than with traditional construction. Traditional construction, as you know very well, as a multifamily entrepreneur, is a very complicated process. You get different people with different expertise. Everything needs to be coordinated. Everything is very expensive, lots of time and everything. With 3D printing, a big chunk of that is done with this one machine producing a certain design. It's, of course, not nearly as customizable as traditional stick built, where if you have a lot of money, you can do almost anything. But if you're looking for kind of high quality, durable housing for middle-class families, 3D printing is a very promising technology for that.
Wow. So will the walls, the entire structure be concrete? Is that
yes.
What it will be? Okay.
I mean, you can then, if you want, you can add a roof that's metal or shingles, or whatever, you will add the flooring and all those finishes. But yes, the basic structure is concrete.
Okay. Well, speak to, how 3D printing is going to change, the American housing market or make it more profitable or less, or how do you see that working out?
First of all, we need to remember that this country has a huge housing shortage, right? So the real reason why multifamily is such a great investment is not just because the interest rates were down for a little while or because millennials like to rent or anything like that. The real reason is that we need something like 4 to 5 million new housing units. And those are not coming because of the cost. They are just so expensive to build today. And what 3D printing does is it allows us to build faster and at a lower cost. So the way 3D printing is going to change American real estate and housing is just going to make it a lot more affordable than it used to be. So if you think of building a house today in, let's say, Texas, where we work in Houston area, can cost $250,000, maybe even more. If you do that for $150,000, that would be a complete game changer for many families that are not making, $300,000 a year.
Okay. Wow. Speak to who's going to own this 3D printer. I was thinking about the developer that's going to go in and make the houses more affordable and more profitable, maybe in multifamily, whatever that's going to look like. But who owns that machine? Is that the developer, or are they going to hire somebody to come in and do this? Or are they going to own it themselves? How does that look like, or as you see this, growing, over the next, many years, probably?
There's a few different ways to do this. So the way we would do it at family communities is we would buy the printer and then we would have a licensing agreement with the technology provider, with a company called Mudbots that kind of allows us to use it in certain ways and all that. So it's a combination of ownership and licensing. The contractor or developer that works with us would then actually be an equity partner in our company. So they would be partly compensated with cash, like you typically do with a general contractor, but they would also be compensated with equity, which means that we need to raise less capital to get this going, but they get this long-term income stream from doing this. And this, by the way, is a very common trick in Silicon Valley, right? So if you are investing in a tech company, there's often no money moving except from the investor to the kind of operator, and then the operator gives you equity, and over time you start making money instead of kind of real estate where we typically make an equity investment and expect distributions in like 6 to 12 months.
Wow. Okay. No, that's interesting. I just wondered what that's going to look like, as we're doing a few developments as well, potentially more in the future. I'm mostly partnering with a developer that's already established in a market, right? But this is interesting, as we think through, hey, potentially this could be this could be a game changer, right? If you can build units that much faster and, and I'm sure the, 3D printing capabilities are only going to grow so quickly. And what do you see that looking like? I mean, the capabilities that you have now to do a 3D printing and building a house or an apartment building, a year from now or 5 years from now, how do you see that changing?
So I think we are right now at the time, kind of at the cusp of this becoming a commercially viable thing. Just 3-5 years ago, it was still laboratories and demonstrations and pilots. But now we have proof of concept. We have this in Austin. There's 3D printing housing in New York State, in Virginia, where I think both of us actually live. So this is a real thing now. It's still obviously not yet where it needs to be to produce 5 million units or anything like that. But so I think it's going to just get better over time. We are at the kind of, so here's one way to think about it. Think of when the first mobile homes came on mobile phones came on the mass market, right? Maybe we are there now. It's working, it's good, but it's nowhere near where an iPhone is today. So I think we are going to do much better in the next 5 to 10 years. Technologies keep evolving and we can do more things. Not just this one type, but everything from a very large single family house, maybe to multifamily. Maybe we can start printing like apartment complexes soon.
Maybe you can speak to the impact of climate change and on the real estate market. Let's dive in there a little bit, and maybe we'll bring the 3D stuff full circle, again in a moment. But what does that mean? How is that going to affect the real estate market? And what do you see, over the next, few years?
I think we can break this question into two parts. One is the impact of the natural change itself. So our changing climate, what is that impact? I think it has a few impacts. One is that it changes the markets that are attractive. So today, for example, we've seen Arizona has been an amazing market over the past 10 years with huge appreciation and everything. But with the water cost increasing in a dry state, dry area like Arizona, that might not be sustainable moving forward. So as a result of that, people are now looking for markets where water availability is more. Another one is sea level rise. So again, if you think of some areas of, let's say, Florida, for example, where you have these low-lying coastal communities, what is going to happen to property values? There was a recent study that was actually looking at the Miami real estate market, and what they found was that those areas that are low-lying, that are right there where the water levels are increasing, are not seeing nearly the same pace of appreciation than those that are kind of like elevated, where the risk is much lower. So this is something that is going to have an impact again on where to invest. And some people are talking, for example, now about the possible kind of a reverse migration where people might start moving to markets like Michigan because the weather is not nearly as extreme during the summer. The water resources are very plentiful. So those could become a lot more attractive markets down the road. So that's one side of it. The other side is policy. So depending on the state, there's going to be different policies to deal with climate change. Again, this depends a lot on the state. So some of the blue states are very enthusiastic about climate change. And in California, for example, investing in real estate looks very different now because of all kinds of mandates, regulations, incentives, and all that. Others, the more sort of red states, less so. If you go to, say, Mississippi, for example, you might see less enthusiasm for this today. But the ones that I find really interesting are the purple states. They're kind of like on the balance. So the Carolinas, for example, very good real estate markets, lots of growing population and everything, but also there's a lot of people there who are concerned about climate change. So they give credits for clean energy. They are changing their policies, the flood insurance policies, to take climate change more seriously. So that policy impact is also coming in those states.
Interesting to think through that as well. Well, how should we prepare for climate change as, real estate investors? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think the things to do, the most important one really is to look into the markets that you are investing. So I made recently, for example, an investment in a very large hospitality development in Florida. And this was as a passive investor. And the sponsor told me that I was the only investor who asked about sea level rise. And turned out this was in a place where there's most likely not going to be a lot of risk over the next 20 years or so. But I was thinking about it. So you get these investors investing in Florida without asking about sea level rise. They could lose all of their money. If you go on that YouTube and you check out, you can find videos of entire homes being washed away by the ocean in some of these places. So I think looking into these impacts and taking them kind of in consideration when you're making your investments is the number one. And the other one is to look for those opportunities. So again, if you think of, for example, investing in the Midwest, I'm always keeping an eye on Michigan and Ohio because those have very good natural resources. They're not places that are going to be hit very hard by climate change anytime soon. And they have some very good markets like Columbus, Ohio, for example. So I would certainly look into those as possible investments moving forward.
Are there some places we can find data or, just information to educate ourselves a little bit around this as we're looking at markets? Let's say like Florida, like you talked about, okay, there's homes that have been completely washed away. How can we educate ourselves to figure out, okay, the places that we should avoid or be okay with, when thinking about that?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, if you just go online and Google climate risk, you can find a lot of basically modeling studies that look at, for example, the level of risk by zip code. And if you're in a coastal area or next to a river or something, you can do flood risk analysis. Tools are quite sophisticated today. So for example, we are doing this hospitality investing in West Virginia, and we have a property that's actually technically in a flood zone. And back in the old days, we would have been hammered with all kinds of insurance. But today, they literally have these tools that tell you that particular building has this risk under these assumptions. So you can get very detailed information on those risks today.
Okay. What about any other risks around climate change that we should be thinking about that maybe we wouldn't even know to ask about?
That is actually a really interesting question. I think most people who are following this area know the basic ones: sea level rise, extreme heat, storms, and so on. But I would say that the one thing that really we need to look into is the impact of kind of all of these together on the kind of economic development of different communities. So again, if you think of a place like, let's take Florida. So there are some parts of Florida that are actually not that vulnerable to climate change. I'm thinking of like Orlando or something like that. They're probably going to do quite well, and they might actually benefit from this if there is kind of within Florida more move into those areas from the ones that are going to be very heavily hit, which I think are going to be the southern coastal parts of Florida. So not just thinking about specific impact on specific property, but where do people want to live? So far, we see that Americans clearly don't like snow. They're moving from the cold areas to the hot areas. But if the temperatures keep increasing at the rate they have recently, at some point living in some of those places, it's just going to be very hot and very humid. And as a result, we might see changes in the migration patterns.
It's interesting. We don't like the cold, so we move to the heat, and then it's going to get hotter when we move back. Right? So that'd be interesting to see how that works out. But what about technology? How it's going to be used to improve just the profitability and hospitality, or even in climate change and things like that. How it's going to affect that?
Yeah. So I think there's going to be a number of things. One of them is certainly the electricity and energy use. So if you're in a very hot area, then obviously air conditioning is going to be a very big one. And as a result, sort of better air conditioners, more smart technology that kind of regulates the temperature more efficiently, and just clean electricity generation like solar panels. So in hospitality, for example, electricity is a huge problem, right? Because you don't really get to manage it yourself, and the tenant doesn't pay the bills. It's the guests, and the guests, when they are in a hotel, how much do you think they care about your electricity bill when they are staying at your property? Not at all, right? So it's really, really challenging. So you kind of have technologies to minimize that and manage that. Just to give you one example. So a friend of mine is a very experienced kind of consultant. He finds energy solutions for commercial real estate. And he said that today, water heating with solar anywhere in the 48 states, contiguous 48 in the United States, is a home run. That you should use solar power, do water heating, maybe not in Alaska, that might still be a bit tricky, but everywhere else, he says, it always works. It saves you money. So that's something. Solar, it depends on where you are, both insolation and the policies. So if you're in the Carolinas, great. If you're in Arizona, great. If you are in Maine, I don't know about that. So there's going to be a lot of different solutions. And I think it's going to be exciting to see a real service industry grow into this and start looking for ways to add value.
So what about solar power and multifamily? And does it make sense? And just being able to scale, and service, say, that many units at a time. What do you see that looking like?
Yes, absolutely. So if you think of solar power in multifamily, first of all, the fact that you have so many units is a big advantage because it gives you economies of scale. The second benefit there is that there's always going to be some expense in the common areas, right? So you've got the corridors, you've got offices, things like that. That's where you can literally directly save money if you are in a good area with the right policies and lots of sun exposure. You can save a lot of money with those. But you can also help your tenants save money. So even if the tenants are responsible for their own utilities, as is case in some multifamilies, you can tell them that if you come here, your utility bill is going to be a lot lower. And if you have some kind of a bill back system, then it just saves everybody quite a bit of money. So I would expect those solar technologies really to take off in multifamily in areas where there's a lot of sunshine and where the just kind of fundamentals make sense.
Do you see that as like something that's going to take over the roofs? Or, just think about, there's a lot of properties, there's not like a lot of extra land, right? Where you can put up solar panels, things like that. Is that something you would see just covering roofs? And, I was just thinking about how much solar panels we would need to justify how much power we need for whatever it is, as far as supplying for that many units.
Yeah, so the roofs are obviously the first place that you would look for, but they might not be enough, again, depending on the electricity consumption and all that. In some places, they've got this very interesting new program called community solar, where the apartment building can kind of like buy a small share of a solar park somewhere else and then have kind of direct electricity come from whatever that means. The grid is a system and all this is kind of notional in a way, but nonetheless, so if you don't have enough roof space, you can still invest in solar by doing that. And I know some companies that are doing that. They're always looking for multifamily operators with whom they can have a contract so that they can save them some electricity bills and of course themselves get compensated for their effort.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing, that you could invest or to partner in solar at a different location, right, than on your own. Any way to learn about that specifically as an operator?
Yeah, so I think the good way to do that would be to check out some of these companies. So, for example, one that I know that is doing this in some states is called Arcadia Power. So just check out their website, learn about, see if they have any programs. I know they've got some programs in Virginia, New York, Colorado, for example, so where you can learn about these opportunities. And I'm always happy to talk to any fellow real estate entrepreneurs about how to get this going.
Awesome. Well, I guess let's bring it full circle now and bring back in the 3D printing stuff as we think through, like you're talking about climate change. How are those things going to be connected, or are they? Is 3D printing going to help us to build better units that may reduce our insurance rates or, be better built, in areas that, hey, maybe there's a higher risk for that storm or sea level rise or, whatever it may be, or extreme heat even?
I think so. So the technology that we use, it does make the concrete more durable than kind of traditional techniques for that. So the homes that we build should last longer, which means that they're going to have less maintenance and they're going to be less vulnerable to storms, hurricanes, and so on. Now, this is, of course, always going to depend on the specific context. We are working in Texas where that kind of resilience is very valuable. And we do hope that over time, insurance companies will recognize that these are more robust structures. That will take time. So insurance companies are not known for their bold embrace of new technologies. But I would imagine that in the next 5 to 10 years, as they gather more data and they learn that these structures are really more robust, they will offer better rates for operators who use them.
Yeah, that's going to be neat to see that happen over the next number of years for sure. Thank you for that. Tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you.
So the easiest thing to do is really through LinkedIn. So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn messages and all that. So you can find me there. I'm the only Johannes Urpelainen in the world. So if you use my name, you'll find it easily. You should also check out the website of my business, Oasis Equities. So that's just oasisequities.com. Take a look. You can find all about our portfolio investment and so on there.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope you have liked and subscribed to the show. Please tell your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show. And I hope that you are learning and growing. Don't forget to go to lifebridgecapital.com where you can start investing today.